don't hear any music though. Hello and welcome to this very special live stream of Maths, the brand new EP by Marteka, out now on my label, Eklektik. Now, I am very lucky to be here today with the exceptionally talented composer, producer, and DJ, Marteka herself, right here on the other side of the screen to me. The track you just heard as you were coming in is called Fulcrum. It's the first track off this new EP entitled Maths that Marteka has just released. And I've been talking for a moment, so I'd love to give Marteka the opportunity to introduce herself, if you would.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marteka, and I wrote this EP. I don't know. I play a bunch of random forms of electronic music, mostly techno these days, but I hope you guys enjoyed a couple different things from this EP.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to have it out on Eklektik. As the name of the label might imply, I've always had an interest in creating a platform where the more left-handed forms of electronic music and experimentation can call home. And now, some of us may know Marteka a bit better as a techno DJ, and quite a good one at that. So Fulcrum in particular is something of a stylistic departure from what we have previously heard from you. Is there anything that inspired you to take it in this direction for the new EP?
Well, I was kind of listening to a lot of different things that I don't normally get to play. If you looked at like my Spotify or like SoundCloud, it's all full of music that's really random and kind of all over the place because I feel like there's always like a different song for whatever kind of mood you're in. And I was listening to a lot of Sigur Rós and a lot of different kind of electronic-esque music, but it was like little left field. So I was very interested in kind of doing something a little bit different and really testing myself musically.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I hear a lot of esoteric influences like that. You mentioned Sigur Rós in particular. And for this first track, Fulcrum, the thing that really stands out to me is the texture of it. I mean, there's kind of this formant sound that persists throughout the entire track other than that break in the middle. And I actually had the opportunity to see Sigur Rós live at the Anthem here in Washington, D.C., now it must be a few months ago, and there was a lot of texture in their music too. But of course, the situation is very different because with Sigur Rós, they're basing their sound around what sounds to me to be still acoustic. What I
Hmm.
find really fascinating about maths in general, and particularly Fulcrum, is that although you're working with electronic textures and you're working with these kind of otherworldly synthetic sounds, they still remain very vocal, very organic. And I was wondering if you might be able to describe a little bit of the process that you went through to retain the soul in these sounds.
That is a super good question. Thank you for all the kind words, by the way,
Yeah, of
about the
course.
track. But I think I had discovered a device that, oh, sorry, I hit the mic. A device that I shared with you recently, Slink devices, and
Yeah, indeed. It's an
something,
Ableton Max for Live device, right?
yeah, it's developed by the head of Hypnus Records. I think his name is Max and Dorisberg. But it's basically three different things. It's got like an LFO and a MIDI and a couple other things on it. But for me, what really unlocked a lot of the organic feeling of this track was playing with just the MIDI device and just automating, turning it on and off, or even just like playing in a way in the different variations in the track. So I would just kind of like listen to the playthrough of the track and then just kind of like manipulate that texture that you hear evolving back and forth. And then I listen to a lot of ASMR actually. So I always have my headphones on and I'm thinking about the pan and how the stereo field kind of feels for the listener. So I really
Yeah,
wanted
nice.
to kind of push that a little bit more. It might feel a little discombobulating for some, I think, but I really like the feeling of, certain parts of that track when you just can kind of listen on really nice headphones.
I fully agree. And for those who might be unfamiliar, Martika was actually part of a very interesting festival down in Durham, both in May of this year and most recently in October. The October iteration of which we actually built out a quadraphonic room and invited a bunch of artists who were doing various spatialized performances. It's definitely something that's been influencing my own work recently. And now considering, that this sense of space is something that you were really playing around with on Fulcrum, at least. It makes me curious to see, or to hear more accurately, what it might sound like in quad sound, in ambisonic sound. And that's the wonderful thing about electronic music, in my opinion, that, certain sound sources have to be captured in a specific way. If you're going to be capturing the sound of a guitar, for instance, you can capture the sound from the strings, from the sound hole, from the fingerboard, or even just from the room around it, but it will only ever really be coming from one place. Um,
Mhm.
the really interesting thing about electronic music is that you can generate these actual, like, single points of sound, where, like, you can have a singular sound that, like, if you were to hear it represented, like, in real life in whatever the pure electricity sounds like, it would be like a completely mono sound, and you can place those throughout a stereo field wherever you want and sort of ping them around in really, in some cases, disorientating or, in other considerations, very exciting ways. And that's something that I notice in all the tracks in this album. Of course, we will listen through the entire album, but especially in the consideration of space. When you're writing a track, when you're mixing something and trying to hear it, do you work on speakers? Do you work on headphones? What do you do to create that space that you want to hear and then sort of subsequently translate to the listener?
Well, for me, space is kind of a huge factor. I don't have like a lot of space, but I mostly try to follow like the standard mixing rules, I guess. Having bass and mono and certain things like that. But then I just utilize the Bear Dynamics like almost solely. I just got some M audio monitors just for listening to records, but I'll probably start using them a little bit more just to kind of get something else to test tracks on. But right now, just for the stereo field, I've been using the Bear Dynamics, and the open back is really, really nice because I can kind of feel the pressure, if you will. And I kind of learned from
Mm-hmm.
this other YouTube video. I mean, I learned everything from YouTube. Um, you basically take your headphones and you hold them like this, and then you play the music, and then you feel kind of like how it would feel pressure wise in the club if the bass is like really hitting in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, basically it's just headphones for me, just because I don't have a ton of space, unfortunately.
That's
Hey, Nick.
Yeah, really super interesting. We have a guest in the chat here, a good friend of both of ours, a very talented musician in his own right, Nick Donito, saying that he likes to output his stuff to mono to emulate the experience of standing by a speaker and not talking to anyone. And, that's a really interesting comment because I feel like in many ways, electronic producers tend to take such a personal, intimate approach to their own productions where, you spend a lot of time because, oftentimes you're not working with a band or sometimes even with even another musician. So a lot of producers, I find, especially in the electronic field, the music is kind of isolated. It's sort of grown in this laboratory. As you can see, Marteka is joining us from her own laboratory tonight, but that is unfortunately why in her listening space there isn't so much room. You got to make room for all the machinery here.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that really stands out to me about, excuse me, maths, each of the tracks features an element that reconnects me with the humanity behind the sound design. And I think this is a really, really fantastic time to take a moment to listen to the second track on the album, which is called Power Is Out. It's titled Power Is Out. Parenthetically, behind that you have For Florian Schneider, and I definitely would like the story behind that one.
Yeah, sure. So this track is actually I had to look back into my computer, and it's the oldest track on the EP. I actually started writing this before the third track, which I thought was like the first thing I ever showed anybody. But when Florian Schneider unfortunately passed away in 2020, the year we shall not speak of, I decided, Kraftwerk has always been such a huge inspiration for me, just as like a listener before I even was thinking of producing music. And so I was like, I'm just going to make a track that kind of encapsulates how I feel about, how much good music I've heard from them all over the years, and just to kind of pay homage. And yeah, it just ended up being my favorite track that I've probably made, because it's just kind of like pure creativity, just because I feel like they translated humanity's, language into machines, and, want to continue to further that discipline if we can.
That's a brilliant way of looking at it. Thank you for sharing that story, that tidbit of information behind the track. I think now is a great time to have a listen to it, so please enjoy Power Is Out for Florian Schneider off Marteka Fair's new EP, Maths. Righto. That is Power is Out for Florian Schneider. Let's get our faces back up here on the screen, and the music is now paused. Perfect. Well, I gotta say, that is such an interesting combination of elements, and considering it through the lens of Kraftwerk, and especially Florian Schneider, who is well known to, for his work on voice synthesis and, in a way, kind of making machines talk. I think it's super interesting to have a piece that is so instrument heavy, but then with a very obvious but sort of decoupled from its original context sample. Where's that sample, by the way, that you've got in there?
It's Miss Frizzle from Magic School Bus.
It's insane. It works really in such an interesting way because, well, the Magic School Bus. I think we might be dating ourselves a little bit here, but
100%.
the premise is that you've got this teacher, Miss Frizzle, who takes all of her school children on this these incredible adventures by shrinking themselves and going through people's blood vessels or anything like that, or clapping and being able to see the sound waves reverberating. It was a fantastic show with some kind of fantastically synesthetic elements about it, and I really detect that with The Power Is Out. That what I'm hearing, and the way that the texture is emerging, it's not a recognizable structure for me, just thinking through the lens of classical music or more traditional song structures, but the actual sound design is really super evocative. Was this one done with any sort of hardware? Was it done all in the box? The sound of it is so unique. That's what really stands out to me here.
Yeah, no, so I made this, like I said, in 2020 when I first started producing, and the sounds are all native instruments. I was using Machine at the time, or Machina, depending on if you're German or not. But yeah, it was a really exciting time to be making music in Machine because it just they have the best sounds in my opinion, even over some Ableton stock stuff. They just have really great artists who are creating sounds for them,
Mm-hmm.
which is super, super cool. They've made a couple updates to their UI that kind of pushed me to doing Ableton. And yeah, it kind of switched my creativity in a different way, but I really love all the sounds that I got out of Machine when I was working with it.
For sure. And the first track on the album, Fulcrum, was that done in Ableton or was that also Machine?
That one was on Ableton. That is probably the most recent track
Oh, that's
that I
right.
made for the
That's
EP.
all the Slink devices on that one. It was
Hmm.
super super interesting. Now, one thing that I also wanted to talk about, and I think now that we're sort of at the halfway point of the EP, is a good time to bring it up. The title of the EP, Maths. Now,
Hmm.
it's kind of, for those of us who, have spent time with English people or just overseas, it's often referred to just as maths. But it's kind of an exotic way to say it in America. And even more esoteric a concept when you think that typically people will consider electronic music to be repetitive, to be somewhat mathematical, to be kind of predictable and formulaic. And I feel as though every track on Maths kind of breaks with that expectation and indeed sort of eschews some of the classic elements of techno, of house, of electronic music, broadly speaking, other than the fact that it's being created with synthesizers. And I was wondering if you might be able to describe some of the intent there, if there was any.
Um, yeah, I think I just really wanted it to be cheeky in a way, and for me, I thought maths was just really funny. Like, yes, there are different types of mathematics like geometry, and calculus and all kinds of things, and there's all different types of electronic music as well, and ways of expressing yourself musically. And I think that I just wanted to kind of convey that in a way that, these tracks are not going to be super, super hard and going to rinse people out or anything. They're going to be kind of fun and something you can just pop on and listen to, or, nothing too intimidating. I think sometimes I've played certain sets where, I maybe gone a little too hard and never really kind of cradled someone after.
Oh,
But
I
with this, I
mean,
want these
haven't we
tracks to
all?
be like fun and poppy and but not pop in a way, if that makes any sense.
It makes sense to
Yeah.
me. Although I'll be perfectly honest with you, the idea of maths is probably the most intimidating thing to me in the world. Um,
Yeah, right. Same.
but that's all. That's a really interesting take. Mainly because I think uh, when we deal with electronic music, I mean, we've been very blessed as electronic musicians in recent years to have had such a widespread interest in, EDM and all the big festivals. And when something like that happens, when a new format of performance and composition is put into the mainstream, into the public eye, there's obviously going to be some stylistic traits that develop out of that, kind of have a low price of entry that people can really get down with and enjoy. But what it also does is it opens the door to music like this, where, when you would previously really only find this kind of more experimental electronic music in pretty niche communities who have a very specific ear that is open to hearing new sounds. Now that electronic music has kind of come to the forefront as one of the most creative and exciting ways to compose, in my opinion. What really interests me in new music is hearing these experimental techniques, is hearing these less codified and less formulaic ways of creating music, even though we're getting closer and closer to doing it exclusively with machines that function on a very mathematical and mechanical basis. That's also why I think this next track on the EP, which is called Motion, spelt in a kind of a funny way. I'm going to pop it up here on the screen for a second just so all of you can see it. This is how it's spelt: Motion. It's pronounced motion, but that's how it's spelt. And that's not the normal way. Why is it spelt that way?
So, this track is, I think, your favorite on the whole EP. It's
Yes, it
spelled
is
like
indeed.
that. Yeah, I could tell. But yeah, it's spelled motion because the track is about and includes clips about Paul Motion, who is a jazz drummer and one of my favorite drummers, maybe my favorite drummer, actually, after a couple different people in second and third. I came from a drum background, mostly jazz and, marching band stuff. So I decided to nerd out a little bit on my GCSE EP, if you will.
That's a great way to describe it. You mentioned something really important there, which is you do come from a drumming background from playing set, or what kind of percussion were you into back in the day?
I played a set, but in marching band and in regular band, I was the timpani and bass player, if you couldn't tell.
I think for those of us who are listening a little closer to the music, that makes a lot of sense to me. The percussion on Maths is a great feature of the EP, in my opinion, because, again, it takes sounds that you might be familiar, especially if you listen to electronic music, these really deep and heavy kicks and these kind of synthetic textures that wind in and out of each other. But the way that they're placed next to each other, the way that they're utilized, is much more granular, it's much more expanded. And I think that one of the tracks that illustrates that the best is this one, titled Motion. So please enjoy the third track from Maths by Marteka.
Let's just play some good old-fashioned time. I told Paul, don't play any clouds.
He was a motherfucker.
That is Motion by Marteka Fair. Track 3 off the new EP, entitled Maths, out now on Eklektik Electric, my humble indie label. And what a track that is. In listening to it, I felt like I was hearing a compendium of every possible way of grouping, the beats that I was hearing. Funny thing about that particular track is when I was sending it out to the distributor, and they have all these questionnaires about like whether or not it's explicit or like contains vocals or whatever. I was like, this one really isn't. And the next thing I see is this note that's like, even a sample like with one word constitutes having vocals in it. I'm like, yeah, okay. And it's like, is any track on this EP explicit? I'm like, no, of course not. It's all just samples. And then there's that one clip in this one where it's like Roy Haynes or somebody saying like, yeah, Paul Motion, he was a motherfucker. And then I had to go back and redo the whole form because, I forgot about it. I was listening back through and I was like, oh yeah. But yeah, so that one is super cool because you get to hear not only the kind of rhythmic influence of Paul Motion's drumming, and I do hear it a lot, and there's little syncopated hits on the snare, and on some of the way that the percussion sort of dips in and out and sort of creates these smaller rhythmic figures within a larger beat, within a larger rhythm. Is that something that you were consciously considering about, his style of drumming, or was it more an aesthetic influence of, being close to that aesthetic of jazz drummers, being a drummer yourself? I'm really curious to know how your previous experience with playing acoustic drums lines up with the way that you create your electronic drums and rhythms for a track like this.
No, I'm glad that it comes across like I kind of like emulated his style a bit. I'm glad that comes across a little bit. That was not the intention, but I'm glad it seems that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I really like his style of drumming, but I know that I could never really play like that. The people that I really admire musically, I know that they have their own unique perspective on music, on that particular, they have their own thing going. So I always just try to like, do my version of, kind of what I thought was cool or was inspired from what they were doing. But yeah, I think what really made me jump full force into like making this track was, one, I watched Whiplash and I got back into like the mode of like, oh, okay, conservatory life. And then secondly, I wanted to join or like be in this Beatport contest, and it was probably like the second track I ever made, and I was like, oh, this will give me a reason to like actually finish this track and try to produce something. And yeah, I sent it and I did not win, but it's cool though because now we have it on this EP.
I was going to say thank God, because now we can release it here, and that's very good news for me indeed. So that brings up another really important point, which is Maths is only your second ever public release, isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first release Marteka did was with a wonderful label based in Durham, North Carolina, called Maison Fauna, which Nicholas Donito, joining us here in the chat, is actually one of the heads of, so very honoured to have him here on the stream as well. Artemis was not what I would call a typical techno track either. Very club ready, wonderfully produced.
Oh, thank you.
But pretty upfront, and were people to get familiar with your musical style on that track, I think that all the stuff that you hear on Maths might be considered as a little left-handed compared to that. Are these tracks that you've put on Maths things that you intend to take into your sets in the club? Is it something you intend to use as, just a piece of sound design and inspiration that you had at this moment and let them exist on their own as a record? Did you have any intent for this music, as to be like a club track, or as to try to introduce it into your own method of performance when you wrote them? Or were they really more experiments in sound design and records of your travels through electrons here?
Yeah, no, it definitely was more of an experiment. I think for me, I think I only started producing because I think I had kind of like pushed myself a lot DJing, and um, was not listening to music so much, mostly because a lot of music I was hearing wasn't necessarily something that was really capturing me the way that like music I was listening to, like, I don't know, like even 3 or 4 years before that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I just kind of like went at it like, oh, I just want to kind of have another outlet to connect me with music. So I guess the next step was to naturally just start making it. But with these tracks in particular, each one is kind of different. I kind of made them at a different time throughout the last 2 years. And it kind of like shows and like the different things that I learned as I was like learning how to make music is kind of reflected in the EP, but also I think just kind of the different influences and places that I've been over the last 2 years are kind of reflected in it as well. So I think it's kind of like everyone had a quarantine record in 2020. Mine's just like 2 years late. So yeah, I think that's what it is.
2 years late and well worth the wait, in my opinion. And
Oh, thanks.
that, yeah, of course, I really enjoy the EP. One thing that you mentioned was that it's sort of, I guess, a bit of a quarantine project for you. Did it take you about that length of time to complete the recordings on the album? What sort of time frame were these all done on?
Yeah, so I think that the first two tracks were done in 2020, and then the third track, or well, Fulcrum was done probably in like a week, and that was in early October of this year. And then the two middle tracks, Motion and Power Is Out, were kind of coupled together. They were written around the same time in like mid 2020, around like the summertime. And then the last track, Revision, I would have to go back and see, but it's probably from last year, 2021. And it's actually was named something else, and I found it randomly. And it is probably one of the only tracks on the record that I would probably play at the club, actually, after getting some feedback from people.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's definitely our cue to take a listen to Revision. Wow, it is way harder to do like two things at once and like click on the right windows when you're also talking and like presenting to a stream. But this is Revision, the final track on Marteka Fair's brand new EP, just released yesterday on Eklektik Electric. It is currently on Bandcamp now, as you can see, where we are listening to it. It will be on streaming platforms, Beatport, what have you, in the weeks to come. Be sure to stay tuned because we'll announce all of that. But for now, please enjoy Revision by Marteka Fair. That is such an interesting one. Revision by Marteka Fair, the final track on the new EP on Eclectic Electric, entitled Maths. Now, that one is really, really interesting to me because although it's an entirely instrumental track, one of just two on the album that's that way, it feels very narrative to me. It feels like there's such a strong direction, and that I'm being almost taken through a through composed piece, like hearing different movements of the same theme or of the same experience. And a big question for me is, when you start working on a track like this, do you begin with some sort of structural idea of where it is and where you want to take it, or do you just follow the path and kind of, see if it sounds good to you?
That's a very interesting question. I think sometimes, or at least when I was writing these tracks initially, I kind of like went in seeing what I could get out of what I was working with at the time. I kind of would like go in with not like a
Mm-hmm.
super solid idea, but then I knew like, well, if I do this and this, then at least I'll have something going. So then in the
Right.
process of like getting, in the words of Genius of Time, painting with large brushstrokes, I would like at least be able to chisel something out of that, that sounded good to me, eventually. But that would take like a lot of time. Now I kind of go in with a lot more intention, at least for this next series of tracks I've been working on. I tend to like have like a video or something in the background to kind of like get me in like inspired mood, kind of like fast track that, because motivation, I feel like for a lot of people who make music in general, is like a little bit hard, especially when it's something where you're not necessarily playing with other people. You're kind of just in your room or in your studio playing on hardware or like on your computer. So it's a little bit harder to kind of get the feel of like if you're in a band or something. Um,
I can certainly agree with that.
yeah, for sure.
Now, what's cool about this is that, you mentioned your next series of tracks. I shan't reveal it here on the stream. I don't think that would be particularly polite. But I happen to have it on good information that if you are
Mm.
enjoying what you're hearing on this release, you should certainly keep your ears to the ground for what's coming next from Marteka Fair. What I'm going to do is, as we get into sort of the conclusion of this stream, post some of the socials and some places where you can find Marteka's music and stay up to date with what's going on right here in the chat. I actually, maybe I should do it like this. I don't know where I am on the actual screen. Now, that's cool though. Thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts on this EP. I almost read it as sort of responsorial to the years that you've spent doing techno. We've DJ'd for quite a number of years together, which I consider quite a privilege, which we now go
Oh,
by
same.
the, thank you, by the DJ name of Trescal. We used to go by Oldwell, but went on a trip to Berlin and figured it was about time to get back up to date. But that's not the focus of today's stream. In fact, it's actually Marteka's release, known now as Eclectic Electric, catalog number 001. It is available on Bandcamp, and I strongly suggest you pick up a copy if you enjoyed today's stream, or, if even you just find our guest artists here that interesting. You shall be rewarded for patient and detailed listening. I wanted to bring up one other point before we, start to conclude the stream, which is that you are a synesthete. For those
Mhm.
who may not be fully up to speed, it's sort of an experiential condition where sometimes people see sound in a certain way or taste color, or any of the wires that are going on up here are just sort of like crossed over in a unique and sensory way. Do you take that advantage of that? Does it produce any sort of synesthetic effect in you working on an album like Maths? Because to me, it puts me in such a vibrant space musically.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's funny that you bring that up because I didn't even know that's what I had until I read this book called Bitter in the Mouth, and it's about a woman who can like taste, like when she says something, she can like taste it which is very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, whenever I hear music, particularly bass, which I guess is really good for me as a drummer, I get like, a series of nice strobe lights, which is really nice. But for me, it's really good for DJing. I think with producing, sometimes it can be a little bit much because it's just like so much stimulus and you're just really excited. It's hard to make decisions. And I think sometimes you can get lost in the sauce with producing if you don't make like some quick decisions on certain things.
That's definitely
Um,
true.
there are some people who can just spend hours sound designing a kick. I am kind of a Luddite, so I wouldn't even make it that long trying to do it. So yeah, I think that part of um, how I produce using kind of my synesthesia to my advantage is usually with the bass. And if I don't feel like if the colors don't come, then it's probably not something I want to spend too much time on.
What a rare gift. And it must make your productions particularly interesting to find those sounds that just produce the right response in you.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened each track on the EP, I've felt that. And I think well, I've only released 5 tracks, but I think each track that I've released has had that kind of like glow to it, which is kind of what it feels like for me. It's like I don't know how people would describe like an aura or a glow or like strobe lights is the best way I can describe it. Just going through my visual field, even when I'm kind of like talking to people, it can kind of be a hue. So
Hmm.
yeah, that is extremely helpful, especially in a dark club if you're DJing.
I would say so. So, in the context of DJing now, I sort of hear this album, and based on some of the things that you said about what you were hearing when you wrote it, and where your ears are now currently, um,
Hmm.
I can certainly sympathize with sometimes almost finding I've been involved with one particular aesthetic for so long that I start to lose a bit of my inspiration. It just kind of stops working for me. Now,
Hmm.
putting out an album like this, Maths, which in some ways is rather esoteric, rather eclectic, electric, if you will, but in other ways, really adheres to some of the traits and some of the things that I think are the most powerful and the most effective about techno. Does putting out an album like this make, more traditional techno fresher for you? Or does it just make you want to push in this direction a bit further?
Um, I think I kind of want to do both. I think after I've put all these tracks together and heard them all together, I was like, okay, I guess now I need to make club ready stuff, which is really, really fun. But I also really like making stuff that gets me connected with like just like checking in with myself. Music for me has always been an extremely personal thing. And I think that even if, I wasn't producing music for like other people to listen to, I would still be making music and it would have to do something for me before I could, put it out there or anything, if that makes any sense.
It definitely does, and that phrase "music for me" is, I think that's really interesting. I think it was just a part of the longer phrase you were saying, but it really stood out to
Hmm.
me. And what I really enjoy hearing, especially in electronic music, is that a lot of the time, music is meant to be DJ'd. It's meant to be part of a larger experience. And in certain ways, it almost becomes anonymous. It almost becomes a little bit faceless in the interest of being acceptable and as a tool for use in a very specific musical situation. I see great benefit in music like that for DJs, for the clubs, for situations where you're playing a set where you just want to dance. That really does something for the body. But maths, and this is where I see the connection with the album and the sort of music that it contains, is something for the mind and for the ears as well as just the body. And
Hmm.
that really fascinates me because when you can perform live and you can DJ in a specific way or a specific style that is a bit more intentionally designed to make people move, to make them dance or headbang or groove or what have you. That becomes a really different pursuit than creating sounds that you want to explore and you want to find the soul in. And, you know, sometimes that takes you outside of the rule book as a DJ, but I think it's really fascinating nonetheless. Now, speaking of performances, I know we've got no tour planned for this particular album, but any performances that those who might want to hear you, should they be aware of upcoming?
Yeah, so I will actually be up in your neck of the woods next week on Friday, and I will be playing at Flash. It's going to be kind of an all night long situation. Kier, who also is on Maison Fauna and a great friend of mine, will be playing. We're going to do a back to back, and then, you know, some separate 90-minute sets, which will be super, super fun. So we'll be on the rooftop playing tunes there. And then on Saturday, and we haven't announced it anywhere, so if you're on the live stream, you get the sneak peek. But me, Kier, and Dea from New York will be playing at Eaton Radio from 3 to 6 p.m.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so you should be hearing that official announced tomorrow. But yeah, that's going to be super, super fun. Really excited to play with these lovely peeps.
Yeah, amazing. And what a treat to bring Marteka and Kier back to Washington, D.C. We had a great set here on the Eaton Radio for My Music Collective's monthly show. When was that? That was more than a few months ago. But
July or August.
Yeah, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So we're all very happy in D.C. to be getting them back. And it has been a treat indeed to have your commentary and presence here on this stream listening through Maths. I really, really enjoy the album. I'm very excited that it's out now, and to actually take some of these tracks and you know, use them live and to bring them out into the light and see how they can be reimagined or interpreted or experienced by all the audiences who may enjoy them. Very, very interested at this point in hearing what your set's going to sound like at Flash. I'll be there. If you are here in the DMV near me, it would do you well to be in attendance on that night. But details to follow. I'm going to post a link to Marteka's Instagram in the chat here right now. I strongly suggest you take a look, follow along.
Or in the chat. I'm not sure which way it is.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure either. And I'm also going to post right now the link to the Bandcamp. The Bandcamp page, which you can now buy Maths at. As I mentioned, we are going to be getting it up on streaming services in fairly short order, but that will be arriving probably within the next few weeks. For now, the best way to support an artist is always to buy the music from them directly. So feel free to pick up a copy of Maths right on Bandcamp. Give it a good listen, see what you think. And if you're in town, check out the Eaton Radio show next week. Check out the show on the Flash Rooftop. It's going to be a great weekend. But I hope you all enjoyed this very brief meeting, Q&A, listening session party with Marteka Fair, our guest artist for the evening, and indeed the composer and producer of this new EP out on my label called Maths. Really hope you enjoyed it. I think we're going to wrap up the stream here. Is there anything else you would like to close with, Marteka?
No, I think this was super fun. I don't really talk a lot, so this was super, super cool. Love to do it again. Thanks for joining me, everybody.
Yeah, thank you indeed. A rare opportunity to hear some of Marteka's insight on her own music. I'm going to bring the page up one more time, just in case you've forgotten. I've only said it about 18 million times, so I certainly hope you haven't. But there it is for your reference. A link to it will be in the chat. Make sure to follow along Marteka's Instagram. It's just Marteka Fair to keep in touch with her future releases and upcoming gigs. And I'm really just chuffed to pieces to have been able to do this stream tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you at the Vanguard.